Okay, let's just jump right into it. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a seriously highly charged source text, and it reveals this massive cultural clash happening in America right now between capitalist and anti-capitalist ideologies. I mean, if you've ever wondered how two people can look at the exact same country and see two completely different realities, well, you are in the right place. We're going to navigate through this really fascinating, rapid-fire commentary that tackles everything from the media diets of billionaires to detention centers, and even how something as simple as a youth debit card can be used as a literal ideological tool. So, let's get into it.
Because our source material jumps around really rapidly, here is our quick roadmap. 1. Media diets and perceptions. 2. Critiques of economic policies. 3. The push for profit. 4. Debating systemic frameworks. And 5. Teaching financial literacy.
Starting with Section 1, Media Diets and Perceptions. Basically, how information consumption shapes reality.
So, the commentator here contrasts the past and the present of the internet. They point out that platforms like Twitter started off as this true marketplace of ideas, right? It was an era designed for open exchange, where literally any regular person could just directly chat with the CEO of a major company. But according to the source, this evolved into something, well, much darker. These spaces became heavily influenced by aggressive data tracking. The commentator actually reflects on his own past working in marketing, pointing out how platforms like Facebook allowed advertisers to track everything, and I mean everything, from your credit card usage to your zip code, which fundamentally altered how ideas and narratives are served to us. Take billionaire Chamath Palihapitiya as a prime example here. He concluded that his mainstream media diet, reading the standard major newspapers, watching the major networks, gave him a completely false perception of Donald Trump. He literally describes feeling brainwashed. He realized that the people whose responsibility it was to speak truth to power were actually just pushing a specific narrative. And this is so crucial for us to look at because it asks a really big question. How much of what we believe is based on raw, unfiltered facts, and how much is just curated by whatever specific media bubble we happen to be sitting in? Moving right along to Section 2, Critiques of Economic Policies, Evaluating the Obama and Trump Eras. Now, the commentator highlights some really specific statistics from conservative pundit Derek Wilburn to argue against the idea that the Democratic Party is naturally the party of the quote-unquote little guy. According to the data cited in the source, under the early years of the Obama administration, the poverty line expanded by roughly 10 million people. On top of that, an additional 6 million Americans went on food stamps, and a staggering 90 million people were chronically unemployed. To put that in perspective, the commentator argues that under this administration, crony capitalism basically thrived, with massive taxpayer dollars going to political donors, while the poor ultimately just became poorer and way more dependent on the state. To kind of sum up the commentator's stance here, he draws this incredibly sharp contrast between two totally distinct economic visions. He views the democratic paradigm as a system built on welfare dependency. He actually describes it as handing out the Kool-Aid of free stuff just to keep voters compliant. Then, in stark contrast to that, he frames the Trump-era paradigm as an opportunity economy, one that really focuses on individual prosperity and actively shows people how to innovate, disrupt, and achieve personal financial success without needing to rely on government handouts.
All right, Section 3, The Push for Profit, the progressive critique of capitalism.
Okay, so we've seen the conservative critique, right? But the source material also gives us a direct window into the completely opposing perspective. The source features a podcast guest who shines a pretty harsh light on privatized systems, specifically focusing on ICE detention centers. She points out that these are actually run by massive corporations like CoreCivic and Geo Group, which, by the way, are traded on Wall Street. Her main argument is that these entities prioritize relentless profit above absolutely everything else. So it's not just about making a few bucks. It's about a corporate structure that literally cannot survive without continuous, aggressive growth.
So the crucial point this progressive guest makes revolves around this honestly terrifying question. If a corporation running detention centers requires infinite growth just to satisfy Wall Street, what happens when they run out of people to detain? She suggests that a system needing endless growth will eventually, expand its net and just consume everything in its path. Now, the commentator firmly dismisses this whole idea as socialist fear-mongering. He argues back that, hey, without profit and corporate growth, there would just be no money to fund anything in society.
Which brings us to Section 4, Debating Systemic Frameworks, Genocidal Frameworks versus Lived Prosperity.
The progressive guest paints a pretty dark and alarming picture of America here. In the source clips, she asserts that the U.S. essentially operated as an apartheid state right up until the civil rights legislation of the 1960s. And she goes further, claiming the nation operates on these underlying genocidal frameworks that systemically target various minority groups. She argues that right now, as we speak, that dial's being turned way up on trans people and Latino immigrants.
And finally, she claims that corporations pushing AI and building these massive data centers will inevitably come to consume working-class resources like homes and water, all in the name of growth.
But the commentator vehemently rejects this entire narrative, and he actually uses his own family's lived experience to counter it. So his father immigrated from Jamaica during the exact same era the progressive guest labeled apartheid. Yet his dark-skinned father and uncles successfully built a construction business, they built houses, and they achieved independent, thriving prosperity. For the commentator, this lived reality completely shatters the doom and gloom narrative being sold to young people today.
And that leads into our final part, Section 5, Teaching Financial Literacy, the Capitalist Counter-Strategy.
To counter all those narratives we just talked about, the commentator actually employs a super practical strategy with his own family, 12 and 13. Those are the exact ages at which he opened bank accounts and literally handed debit cards to his grandchildren.
But he didn't just hand over free money. He instills capitalist values by treating these accounts like a job. He actually requires his 12 and 13-year-old grandkids to follow strict personal and moral guidelines to keep their financial access. First, they have to understand that their mom holds the ultimate off switch. Then, they gotta maintain good grades, keep their behavior in check at school, no calls home for acting up, and attend church regularly. It's a framework that is built entirely on accountability and earned privilege.
He argues that teaching kids exactly how an economy actually works is deeply empowering. Think about it. When his granddaughter buys a smoothie and suddenly realizes she is exchanging digital numbers for a physical good, and that money doesn't just magically appear out of thin air, she's actually grasping the fundamental building blocks of capitalism. The commentator views this practical, hands-on education as the ultimate antidote. He really believes that if you give a young person direction, an understanding of how to compete, and a taste of real personal responsibility, they're going to be immune to that hopeless, anti-capitalist doom rhetoric being pushed by progressives online.
All right, as we wrap up this explainer, we have really seen how vastly different information diets can lead to two entirely different realities, haven't we? One side sees systemic oppression and genocidal frameworks, while the other sees boundless opportunity and the empowering nature of capitalism. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. Take a hard look at the invisible forces shaping your own beliefs. How does your daily media consumption silently dictate what you believe is possible for yourself and for society as a whole? Think about that. Thanks so much for joining me, and as always, keep questioning what you watch.